Hello, and welcome to Bergen Kunsthall and Plattform. Plattform is our talks and lecture series here at the Kunsthall. My name is Steinar Sekkingstad. I'm a curator here at the Kunsthall. And today, for today's event, we are very happy to welcome Evie Ward for a talk on the life and work of the Swedish artist Moki Cherry. This talk takes place on the occasion of our current exhibition, File Under Freedom, which centers around the topic of improvisation in art and music. The exhibition features the work of over 20 international artists, and within this quite large thematic exhibition, there is one room that especially is dedicated to, it's built around the work of two artists really, Moki Cherry being one of them, and the other is the Norwegian artist Sitzel Påske. And between those two artists, the room also looks at meetings between American musicians and Scandinavian musicians and artists in the 1960s and 70s. And in this context, the collaboration between the American musician Don Cherry and the artist Moki Cherry takes on a special role in this exhibition. And yeah, this collaboration between Don and Moki Cherry and the time that they worked together in Sweden in the 70s has a central role in the exhibition. And we are extremely happy to be able to show these amazing works by Moki Cherry here in Bergen. To our knowledge, for the first time really in Norway, at least in an exhibition context. Yeah, and this collaboration between Don and Moki Cherry has been, in the 70s, has been a subject of recent interest and research lately. With, for example, an exhibition and a book published by the organization Blank Forms in New York last year. And a version of this exhibition is currently on show at Argos in Brussels. Also, the gallery Corbett Vs Dempsey in Chicago shown recently an exhibition with works by Moki Cherry, and many of these works that were shown there are now on display in our exhibition here. And another exhibition with works by Moki will open in April, quite soon, in Copenhagen at the gallery Nikolai Wallner. And yeah, I'm mentioning all of this also because our presentation of Moki Cherry is really exemplary, I think, of a renewed interest in her work. And it builds on this great work that has been going on for a while lately with archiving, research, and presentation of the work of both Moki Cherry's art and this collaborative projects of Don and Moki. And Evie Ward, who is with us here today, has been central in some of this work. She has been studying and engaging with the work of Moki Cherry for several years. Evie is a writer and researcher from and based in London. She wrote her MA dissertation about Mokis, textile appliqué tapestries, and the different context of these works at the home and stage and the art spaces. And since 2018, she has been assisting Naima Karlsson, the granddaughter of Don and Moki Cherry, in archival and research work for the Estate of Moki Cherry, also helping with our presentation here. And she also wrote recently a biographical essay about Moki Cherry for a publication, which was published on the occasion of the exhibition I just mentioned at Corbett Vs Dempsey called Communicate How. Just a few introductory words about Evie. Her writing projects include reading and writing live subtitles for a performance for CEREBELLUM with Florence Peake, Zara Joan Miller, and Amy Dickson. She's been reading short stories and poems in parallel with cellist Ute Kanngießer for a live performance at Cafe OTO in London, and exhibiting site-specific poem as part of the group exhibition Like a Sieve at Kupfer Project Space. And she's currently working on a book collaboration of interwoven poems and drawings with Corinne Bernard. Now, this first part of the event here tonight will be a talk by Evie, which is available for everyone who's following us online. The event is live streamed. And then we will continue actually downstairs in the exhibition to look at the works physically also in the space. Thank you so much for being with us, Evie, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here as well. And thank you for coming as well, and thank you to people who are also tuning in online. So Steiner just introduced me and sort of said a lot about how I sort of came to be here talking about Moki's life and work. But initially sort of started when in 2016 I went to Stockholm and I went to Moderna Museet there, and I saw Moki's posthumous exhibition called Moment of her work, and it was just completely by chance that I went, and I was really excited by her work and energized by it and inspired, and thinking about like how to kind of carve out my life creatively as well at that point. And after that show, I wanted to read more about her work, and there just wasn't really much out there. So what happened was that's why I ended up sort of doing my master's thesis on Moki Cherry, and then also doing this work with Naima and sort of programming events around it too, and also doing this research and writing about her for Corbett Vs Dempsey's book, Communicate How, as Steiner mentioned. So this talk's called Reflections of a Living Environment. And to start with, I'm going to introduce Moki and talk about her life and the art she made. And then I'm going to talk about her expanded creative vision of a creative practice and the living environments she created as part of this. And then, as I said earlier, we can go into the gallery and have a conversation about the work there and share insights and questions there too. So the title of this talk actually also comes from a title of a page in one of Moki's notebooks. And Moki was an interdisciplinary artist, and she described herself as an artist-designer. Over her lifetime, she worked in many different formats. She made clothes, paintings, textile appliqué tapestries, and soft sculptures. She also designed posters, pamphlets, and worksheets for various outputs, such as concerts, exhibitions, music workshops, for Tagapsföreningen, which was the cultural collective she was part of and was based out of her family home in Torgård, and for the children's theatre group, Octopus Theatre, that she ran with her friends Anita Roney. She also did illustrations for magazines like Huvudbladet that was created by the artist Kjartan Slettermark. And I'll elaborate more about how she combines some of these art forms in her life and work, as these are the kinds of works that are exhibited downstairs in the gallery. And to also mention actually the other disciplines that Moki worked in later in her life. In the 80s, she made wood sculptures with lights, and she did set design for theatre, such as the Apollo Theatre in Harlem, and also worked for TV. She made ceramics in the 90s as part of the Greenwich Pottery Workshop in New York. And in the 2000s, she made photomontage collages. And actually, towards the end of her life, she returned back to painting and tapestries. So a bit about Moki's background and training. She was born in Sweden in 1943 in Kola, Norrbotten. Her birth name was Naima Karlsson, and she started being nicknamed Moki as a teenager. And it was early in life that Moki was interested in becoming a fashion designer. After she left school, she sought out practical experience, and she worked as an apprentice at Anna Greta Blum, which was an haute couture atelier, and then she worked as a design assistant to Vera Ona at Distingo, which was a women's coat manufacturer in Kristianstad. She then moved to Stockholm to develop those making skills, and she did an evening pattern cutting class, and then she went to Beckman's design school, where she studied pattern cutting, fashion design, and illustration. And midway through her studies, Moki actually had her daughter Nena, and she actually sometimes took Nena to school with her as well. So it was also during this time in Stockholm that she met Don Cherry, who was an American jazz musician, and he's also featured in the gallery downstairs in the same room as Moki in videos from different jazz festivals and in posters and archival material. So Moki and Don started to have a relationship, and they decided to build and share a life together. They became life partners and creative partners, where they'd influenced and inspired one another and worked together on a variety of different projects that reflected their shared interests. So in music and art, working and learning collaboratively with others, and in Dharma and spirituality. And they also included children in their work, where they made a radio program and an educational TV show for children, and also ran workshops and performances across schools in Sweden. Moki's artwork appeared on Don's album covers, and she designed posters and stage designs, and he wore clothes made by her. her output was widely considered the visual embodiment of his music. So the works by Moki in File Under Freedom are from this period when Moki was collaborating with Don, which was for a bit over a decade, from the mid-60s onwards. So Moki, she graduated from Beckman's in 1966, and after she did, and she was waiting for and she was getting some work for her designs actually, there was a period when she was waiting for some paperwork to come through about a potential work opportunity of being sponsored as an artist designer in New York. And during this period of waiting, she started painting intensively, and she made paintings of merging colorful forms, where hidden faces and bodies and patterns blended and swirled into one another. And she described this intense creative experience as a visitation. So there's this immersion in creative practice happening here, and also the beginnings of an exploration into extending forms, which is happening within the content of the work itself. Instead of taking up the potential of work opportunity, and also instead of following a more conventional pathway of exhibiting her paintings in a gallery, Moki applied what she'd been working on and with to a live on-stage setting in collaboration with Don. So this happened in 1967, where Don and Moki had named their collaborative project, Movement Incorporated. And for the first iteration of it, which was described by Keith Knox in Jazz Monthly as their first environmental evening, they organized a concert at RBF Huset in Stockholm, where Moki made posters for the event. Her paintings were on the walls above the audience. She designed the stage set, did live painting, and Don and other musicians performed on stage. So in this instance, Moki extended painting and her creative practice into a live format, where she and her visual art were active on stage, making work in a cross-disciplinary collaboration with the musicians. The activity of painting was combined with the activity of music making, and is an early example of how Moki extended her visuals into a live improvised experience, and stretched how and where her work was experienced. And as I said before, Moki designed the poster for the event too, so her design skills and visual aesthetic were also applied for this functional role in communicating and advertising what the event was. So the same year, Moki painted panels with these big, swirling, colourful forms on the walls of her apartment in Gamla stan in Stockholm. So her aim was to transform her home into a world ready to receive her soon-to-be-born son, Eagle Eye, in. In photos of Moki and Nena in the apartment, like this one here, we see how the interiors are taken over by Moki's visual aesthetic, and Nena's wearing clothes that Moki has made too. So at this point, Moki brought her visuals and her creative practice into the home too, and she was combining her identities as a mother and an artist, and which is documented in these photos with her daughter. So Moki made home a place for artistic expression and creativity alongside family life. It was a place where she could bring in an immersive visual environment as an artist designer in the same nature as how she was doing publicly in the live experience on stage, in performance, and in collaboration with others there. And this encapsulates Moki's motto, "The stage is home and home is a stage," where the lines between home and stage, or life and art, were blurred, and she applied a creative approach to both these spaces. So we see in these two instances early on in Moki's life, working with painting, how she expanded the possibilities of where and how she could make work. In the home, in her identity as a mother, to make a vibrant painted world for her son, and in interdisciplinary collaboration on stage with musicians where music was being created, and as the communication for the concerts. So Moki is also making textile appliqué tapestries at this time and continuing to design and make clothes. So the tapestries she made varied in size, and they were in bold colors with layered shapes and symbols, and featured different mythical characters or words and phrases that referenced her interests and her collaboration with Don. And these tapestries, they both functioned as posters to advertise events, and were also hung or held up on the stage at music concerts, or actively engaged with as learning materials for music workshops that she ran with Don. And these tapestries that were displayed like this, visually changed the feel of a stage set, transforming it into a soft and vividly bright environment. And then at the same time as this is happening, her and Don's bodies that were on stage activated Moki's expanded creative vision too by wearing her clothes that she'd made. And these clothes had the same visual style as the tapestries that surrounded them. And also some of these clothes were even made using the textile appliqué technique, which is the same as the tapestries that surrounded them. So that's like the one that Moki made Don that's in this exhibition, which is in these two photos on the left. So this slide shows Don wearing the top here at Moderna Museet in a photo by Soon Spangberg, and then in the bottom photo, he's in the top with Eagle Eye on the left, and this photo is actually on the back of his record Relativity Suite from 1973. And then this photo on the right is from the workshops that they ran, and he's wearing, they're both wearing sort of homemade clothes. So in her writings, Moki described working visually with Don too, and how they combined the music with visuals. Moki's tapestries and clothing altered and invigorated this onstage environment, which shows how her vision expanded into space in a cross-disciplinary collaboration with the improvised music taking place. And this resulted in a live multi-sensory experience, forming a living environment. This also was a creative vision that was transported for a life on the road, where Moki and Don toured incessantly and went wherever they could get to get work for shows or workshops. So the clothes Moki made could be put to use and worn by her and her family, and the tapestries were rolled up and taken with them. The transportable forms that Moki's work took enabled her to create a consistent aesthetic that was lived with as a multisensory home, as it could travel with her to wherever she and her family went. And it also enabled her to make and share work wherever she went by applying her vision and activating it in the spaces she would inhabit. So it's worth also noting the challenges Moki faced as an artist. She struggled to get recognition from the art world, being a woman and a mother in these times, working in a discipline that was more associated with the domestic space and crafts, and then also she was traveling so frequently without a steady base. And Moki wrote actually about bringing slides and showing her work to galleries in New York in the 70s with her children waiting outside, and the rejection she experienced. And this kind of dismissal meant that Moki also had to look for a different pathway for how to be an artist and where and how to make and share her work. And it had to also take into consideration the circumstances of her transient lifestyle. So Moki and Don were invited to participate in 1871 to 1981 Utopias and Visions, which was an exhibition at Moderna Museet in Stockholm in 1971, and it was curated by Pontus Hultén, and he later became the director of the Pompidou in Paris. And in like the mid-70s to late 70s, he actually invited Don and Moki there as well to run children's workshops, which are called Atelier des Enfants. So at Utopias and Visions, which is all these photos are from, Don and Moki and their children lived and shared work in a Buckminster Fuller geodesic dome for 3 months over summer, and a living environment took place. Inside the dome, visitors were invited to participate in all that was happening and to join in with what was described as a musical aesthetic situation. In this description, we see that combining and leveling of disciplines that's at the root of how Moki and Don collaborated. And in her writings, Moki described living in the dome with her environmental art and the activities that occurred in the dome. She said how visitors participated in the music, talking, dressing up, or photographing themselves in an automat and other improvised activities. And she described what this was as a demonstration of living art. So here, music performances and workshops with different musicians who collaborated with Don took place, where Moki's tapestries, soft sculptures, and cushions adorned the environment. The combination of Moki's outputs that hung from the ceiling, on the walls, and on the floor created an enveloping, soft, colorful, and playful world that altered the contained space of this minimalist white dome. And Moki also gradually painted a mandala on the floor each day and worked on her sewing machine, while children and participants wore costumes she'd made. So we see how Moki is spreading and expanding and filling the space with her work, how the art and environment grows in this space with her visual aesthetic and comes to life with the activity that went on. And this is happening simultaneously as the family lived in the dome. And in accordance with this emphasis on collaboration and improvised activity, I want to share the last line from the note titled Reflections of a Living Environment that Moki wrote. And she wrote, "I really don't care so much for seclusion since there is so much spontaneous love for sharing." Moki and Don had formed a space where they lived and worked as the artist and musician they respectively were. And at the same time, their home life and family life had extended into an art world context at Moderna Museet, and it was celebrated as part of a living, breathing musical aesthetic situation. This was in collaboration with the public in the dome, who were activating the living environment with Don and Moki. Here, the home is the stage. There wasn't the conventions of a separate stage area or start or finish like at a concert. Do you want to come? You can come through if you want to. Here the home is the stage. There wasn't the conventions of a separate stage area or start and finish like at a concert. And instead, everyone was invited to participate in the activity and collaborate and be present and spontaneous together in this live-in residency. And this way of working actually has strong parallels to the kinds of ideas that were taking place in the New York art scene at this time in happenings that were being put on by artists such as Klaus Oldenburg or Yeo Kusama, for instance. And in the downstairs gallery, a hanging fabric sculpture that Moki made for Utopias and Visions is exhibited, which has stuffed dangling udders and protrusions in multicolored shiny silk fabrics, you can see it in this picture here and in the middle one at the top as well. So after it was shown and part of Utopias and Visions, the sculpture was hung in the main living space of Don and Moki's new home, which was actually previously a school hall. And so the room that the sculpture was in and that the family lived in had this historic reference to being a place of learning and growing too. So the creative and collaborative spirit of living art from the dome was extended and continued into the school hall with the artwork's relocation, and where it then existed by all the family activity and living that goes on in the home. So later the same year, in 1971, the sculpture was featured in an educational TV program that Don and Moki made and appeared in called Piff Paff Puff. So the opening credits of the show was filmed in the school hall in Moki and Don's home, and the fabric sculpture hangs in the background where children dance, play the drums, and play on Moki's soft sculptures while her paintings lean on the walls. So in the same year that Moki was participating and making and sharing her work in an exhibition at Moderna Museet, she also shared and featured herself and her home shared work and featured herself and her home in a children's TV show, and then also lived with her work in the home with her family as part of that family life there. So through her work existing and being engaged with and living with and in these different contexts, we see how Moki established an expanded approach to the creative vision of expanding how and where art was experienced and how she identified with the spaces the work was experienced in. Moki was physically present where her work was. She actively participated in these environments as a woman and mother and as an artist-designer. And so these identities expanded into the different creative spaces that were adorned by her immersive visuals and approach too. Moki's vision of combining her different creative outputs, painting, clothing, tapestry, or soft sculpture, and extending them into space where improvised activity and collaborations took place, and that she also participated in herself, formed these living environments. And here, in these living environments, the improvising and living, a phrase she used to describe her approach, took place. So now I've given an overview of a period of Moki's life that she was making these living environments, I wanted to take the opportunity to share some writing by Moki, and we can hear Moki in her own words and in her own voice before we go downstairs into the gallery and maybe continue the conversation there and have time for questions and comments, however we want to use that time. So this first one I'm going to read. And this is actually a page from one of her notebooks, and I'll read that one later as well. So, to experience love, to give love, to receive love, to share love in life, to make it work through work, to search for a way to see if life and living in itself is art by being a creative process. Don and Moki, we had that opportunity. We were each other's muses. I loved his music and playing. He inspired me to express myself visually, and Don loved my work. Ring, bells, bells ring. Bells are ringing, ring, boing, boing, breath, boing. I must find the order, count them, place them, to see the order. Hear the bells, bringing order, ringing order, a toll for the moment. So I think this one really kind of shows Moki's love for wordplay, and also that emphasis on the moment and presentness and spontaneity that she emphasizes in her work. So another one from 1970. To have love for life, one must collect all strength to keep it through the experience called life. And this last one I'm going to read is from the 90s. Tell us. I put my ear as close as I could to the heart of Mother Earth. I need you, I need you. I called you, I need you, I need you, she answered. Thank you. So, should we go together downstairs and maybe just be in the space of Moki's work, and if anyone's got any questions based on what I just talked about, we can...